Hare Krishna, welcome back to another new episode of online reading retreat labs. So we are continuing with the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. In the last session, we have covered first canto, first chapter, first verse. That is SB 1.1.1. And still, I will say that if you're not having the hard copy of this book, definitely you can contact me. This is your first canto hard copy of the book. So it is always better to read hard copy, even though we have online resources. So let's then get started with the second verse of the first chapter. Okay. So let me share my screen. We will go to the database from where simultaneously we also reading for all the online viewers. So this is your database, Canto 1, Creation, Chapter 1, and verse number 2, SB 1.1.2. धर्मप्रोजितकैतवतर परमो निर्माता शरणं सतं वेद्यं वास्तव्यम् अत्र वस्तु सीवतां तपत्रैलोक्यमूलं श्रीमद्भगवते मुनिकृते किं वा परैश्वरः सद्यो हृदि अवर्धयते तरा कृतभिः शुश्रूषिस्तथा क्षणात्. Synonyms: Dharmaha, religiously; Projita, completely rejected; Kaitavaha, covered by fruitive intention; Atra, herein; Paramaha, the highest; Nirmastaranam, of the 100% pure in heart; Satam, devotees; Vedyam, understandable; Vastavam, factual; Atra, herein; Vastu, substance; Sivadam, well-being; Tapatraya, threefold miseries; Anmulanam, causing uprooting of; Shrimat, beautiful; Bhagavati, the Bhagavad Purana; Mahamuni, the great sage; Vyasadeva, Krite, having compiled; Kim, what is; Va, the need; Paraihi, others; Ishvaraha, the Supreme Lord; Sadhya, at once; Hridi, within the heart; Avaruddhyate, becomes compact; Atra, herein; Kritavihi, by the pious man; Susruvihi, by culture; Tatskana, without delay. Translation in purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavad Purana propounds the highest truth which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need for any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of the Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Purport: religion includes four primary subjects, namely the pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. Indeed, human life begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating are the four principles of animal life. These are common both to animals and human beings, but religion is the extra function of the human being. Without religion, human life is no better than the animal life. Therefore, in human societies, there is some form of religion which aims at self realization and which makes reference to man's eternal relationship with God. In the lower stages of human civilization, there is always competition to lord it over the material nature, or, in other words, there is continuous rivalry to satisfy the senses. Driven by such consciousness, man turns to religion. He thus performs pious activities or religious functions in order to gain something material. But if such material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so called religion is neglected. This is the situation in modern civilization. Man is thriving economically, so at present he is not very interested in religion. Churches, mosques, temples are now practically vacant. Men are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than in religious places which were erected by their forefathers. This practically proves that religion is performed for some economic gains. Economic gains are needed for sense gratification. Often, when one is baffled in the pursuit of sense gratification, he takes to salvation and tries to become one with the Supreme Law. Consequently, all the states are simply different types of sense gratification. In the Vedas, the above mentioned four activities are prescribed in the regulative way so that there will not be any undue competition for sense gratification. But Srimad Bhagavatam is transcendental to all these sense gratificatory activities. It is purely transcendental literature which can be understood only by the pure devotees of the Lord who are transcendental to competitive sense gratification. In the material world, there is keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community and community, nation and nation. But the devotees of the Lord rise above the competitions that do not compete with the materialist because they are on the path back to Godhead, where life is eternal and blissful. Such transcendentalists are non envious and pure in heart. In the material world, everyone is envious of everyone else, and therefore there is a competition. But the transcendental devotees of the Lord are not only free from material envy, but are well wishers to everyone, and they strive to establish a competition-less society with God in the center. The contemporary socialist conception of a competition-less society is artificial because in the socialist state there is a competition for the post of dictator from the point of view of the Vedas or from the point of view of common human activities, since gratification is the basis of material life. There are three paths mentioned in the Vedas. One involves creative activities to bring promotion to better planets. Another involves worshipping different demigods for promotion to the planets of the demigods. And another involves realizing the absolute truth and his impersonal feature and becoming one with him. The impersonal aspect of the absolute truth is not the highest. Above the impersonal feature is the Paramatma feature, and above this is the personal feature of the absolute truth, or Bhagavan. Srimad Bhagavatam gives information about the absolute truth in his personal feature. It is higher than impersonalist literatures and higher than the Jnanakanda division of the Vedas. It is even higher than the Karmakanda division and even higher than the Upashanakanda division because it recommends the worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. In the Karma Kanda, there is a competition between to reach heavenly planets for better sense gratification, and there is a similar competition in the Jnana Kanda and the Upasana Kanda. The Srimad Bhagavatam is superior to all of this because it aims at supreme truth, which is the substance or the root of all categories. From Srimad Bhagavatam, one can come to know that the substance as well as the categories. The substance is the absolute truth, the Supreme Lord, and all emanations are relative forms of energy. Nothing is apart from the substance, but at the same time, the energies are different from the substance. This conception is not contradictory. Srimad Bhagavatam explicitly promulgates the simultaneously one and the different philosophy of the Vedanta Sutra, which begins with the Janmadhyasya Sutra. This knowledge that the energy of the Lord is simultaneously one and with different from the Lord is an answer to the mental speculators' attempt to establish the energy as the absolute. When this knowledge too is factually understood, one sees the conceptions of the monism and dualism to be imperfect. Development of this transcendental consciousness, grounded in the conception of simultaneously one and different, leads one immediately to the stage of freedom from the threefold miseries. The threefold miseries are: 1. The miseries which arise from the mind and body; 2. Which arises inflicted by the other living beings; and 3. Those miseries arising from natural catastrophes over which one has no control. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the surrender of the devotee unto the Absolute Person. The devotee is fully aware he is one with the Absolute and at the same time in the eternal position of servant to the Absolute. In the material conception, one falsely thinks himself the lord of all his service, and therefore he is always troubled by the threefold miseries of life. But as soon as one comes to know his real position as a transcendental servant, he is at once becomes free from all miseries. As long as the living entity is trying to master material nature, there is no possibility of his being servant to the of the Supreme. Service to Lord is rendered in pure consciousness and of one's spiritual identity. We, by service, one is immediately freed from material encumbrances. Over and above this, Srimad Bhagavatam is a personal commentation on the Vedanta Sutra by Sri Vyasadeva. It was written in the maturity of his spiritual life through the mercy of Narada. Sri Vyasadeva is the authorized incarnation of Narayana, the personality of Godhead. Therefore, there is no question as to his authority. He is the author of all other Vedic literatures, yet he recommends the study of Srimad Bhagavatam above all others. In other Puranas, there are different methods set forth by which one can worship the demigods, but in the Bhagavatam, only the Supreme Lord is mentioned. The Supreme Lord is the total body, and the demigods are different parts of that body. Consequently, by worshipping the Supreme Lord, one doesn't need to worship the demigods. The Supreme Lord becomes fixed in the heart of the devotee immediately. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has recommended the Srimad Bhagavatam as the spotless Purana and distinguishes it from all other Puranas. The proper method for receiving this transcendental message is to hear it submissively. A challenging attitude cannot help one realize this transcendental message. One particular word is used here in for proper guidance. This word is susrusu. One must be anxious to hear this transcendental message. The desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification. The fortunate persons are not at all interested in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. Unfortunate people find enough time to hear idle social and political conversations, but when invited to attend a meeting of the devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they suddenly become reluctant. Sometimes professional readers of the Bhagavatam immediately plunge into the confidential topics of the past times of the Supreme Lord, which they seemingly interpret as sex literature. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard from the beginning. Those who are fit to assimilate this work are mentioned in the sloka. One becomes qualified to hear Srimad Bhagavatam after many pious deeds. The intelligent persons with thoughtful discretion can be assured by the greatest sage Vyasadeva that he can realize the Supreme Personality directly by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam without undergoing the different stages of realization set forth in the Vedas. One can be lifted immediately to the position of the Paramahansa simply by agreeing to receive this message. So, with this, we completed the text number 2 of the first chapter. Now, we will move to the text number 3. SB 1.1.3. निगमकल्पतरोर्गलितं फलं सुखमुखाद् अमृताद्रवसंयुतं पिबता भागवतं रसम् आल्यं मुहुरहो रसिका भुवि भावुकः. Synonyms: Nigama, the Vedic literature; Kalpataruho, the desire tree; Galitam, fully matured; Phalam, fruit; Sukha, Srila Shukadeva Goswami, the original speaker of the Srimad Bhagavatam; Mukhat, from the lips of; Amrita, nectar; Draba, semi-solid and soft and therefore easily swallowable; Samyuktam, perfect in all respects; Pibata, do relish it; Bhagavatam, the book dealing in the science of material; eternal relation with the Lord; Rasham, juice, that which is releasable; Alayam, until liberation, in a liberated condition; uh, muhuhu, always, aho, oh, rasikaha, those who are in full knowledge of melos, bhurbi, on the earth, bhabukaha, expert and thoughtful. Translation: O expert and thoughtful man, release Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures, is emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already releasable for all, including liberated souls. Purport: in the two previous slokas, it has been definitely proved that the Srimad Bhagavatam is the sublime literature which surpasses all scriptures due to its transcendental qualities. It is transcendental to all mundane activities and mundane knowledge. In the sloka, it is stated that Srimad Bhagavatam is the not only superior literature but is the ripened fruit of all Vedic literature. In other words, it is the cream of all Vedic knowledge. Considering all this, patient and submissive hearing is definitely essential. With great respect and attention, one should receive the message and lessons imparted by the Srimad Bhagavatam. The Vedas are compared to the desire tree because they contain all things knowable by men. They deal with mundane necessities as well as spiritual realization. The Vedas contain regulative principles of knowledge, covering social, political, religious, economic, military, medicinal, chemical, physical, and metaphysical subject matter, and all that may be necessary to keep the body and soul together. Above and beyond all this are specific directions for spiritual realization. Regulative knowledge involves a gradual raising of the living entity to the spiritual platform, and the highest spiritual realization is knowledge that the personality of Godhead is the reservoir of all spiritual tastes or rasas. Every living entity, beginning from Brahma, the firstborn living being within the material world, down to the insignificant ant, desires to release some sort of taste derived from sense perceptions. These sensual pleasures are technically called rasas. Such rasas are of different varieties. In the revealed scriptures, the following 12 varieties of rasas are enumerated. 1. Raudra, anger. 2. Adbhuta, wonder. 3. Sringar, conjugal love. 4. Hasya, comedy. 5. Bira, chivalry. 6. Daya, mercy. 7. Dasya, servitorship. 8. Sakshya, fraternity. 9. Bhayanaka, horror. 10. Vivascha, shock. 11. Santa, neutrality. 12. Vatshalya, parenthood. The sum total of all these rasas is called affection or love. Primarily, such signs of love are manifested in adoration, service, friendship, paternal affection, and conjugal love. And when these five are absent, love is present indirectly in anger, wonder, comedy, chivalry, fear, shock, and so on. For example, when a man is in love with a woman, the rasa is called conjugal love. But when such love affairs are disturbed, there may be wonder, anger, shock, or even horror. Sometimes love affairs between two persons culminate in ghastly murder scenes. Such rasas are displayed between man and between animal and animal. There is no possibility of an exchange or rasa bit between a man and an animal or between a man and any other species of living beings within the material world. The rasas are exchanged between members of the same species, but as far as the spirit souls are concerned, therefore, the rasas were originally exchanged between the spiritual living being and the spiritual whole, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual exchange of rasa or rasha is fully exhibited in spiritual existence between living beings and the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is therefore described in the Shruti mantras, Vedic hymns, as the fountainhead of all rashas. When one associates with the Supreme Lord and exchanges one's constitutional raga with the Lord, then the then living being is actually happy. These Shruti mantras indicate that every living being has its constitutional position, which is endowed with a particular type of rasa to be exchanged with the personality of Godhead. In the liberated conditions, only this primary rasa is experienced in full. In the material existence, the rasa is experienced in the perfected form. which is temporary, and thus the rasas of the material world are exhibited in the material form of Raudra, anger, and so on. Therefore, one who attains full knowledge of these different rasas, which are the basic principles of activities, can understand the first representation of the original rasas, which are reflected in the material world. The Lord scholar seeks to release the real rasa in the spiritual form. In the beginning, he desires to become one with the Supreme. Thus, less intelligent transcendentalist cannot go beyond this conception of becoming one with the spirit whole without knowing of the different rasas. In this sloka, it is definitely stated that spiritual rasa, which is released even in the liberated stage, can be experienced in the literature of the Śrīmad Bhāgavatam due to its being the ripened fruit of all the Vedic knowledge. By submissively hearing this transcendental literature, one can attain the full pleasure of his heart's desire, but one must be very careful to hear the message from the right source. Srimad Bhagavatam is exactly received from the right source. It was brought by Narada Muni from the spiritual world and given to his disciple Sri Vyasadeva. The latter in turn delivered the message to his son Srila Sukadeva Goswami, and Srila Sukadeva Goswami delivered the message to Maharaja Parikshit just 7 days before the king's death. Srila Sukadeva Goswami was a liberated soul from his very birth. He was liberated even in the womb of his mother, and he didn't undergo any sort of spiritual training after his birth. At birth, no one is qualified, neither in the mundane nor in the spiritual sense. But Sri Sukadeva Goswami, due to his being a perfectly liberated soul, didn't have to undergo an evolutionary process for self spiritual realization. Yet, despite his being a completely liberated soul, person situated in the transcendental position above the three material modes, he was attracted to this transcendental rasha of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is adored by liberated souls who sing Vedic hymns. The Supreme Lord's pastimes are more attractive to liberated souls than to mundane people. He is of necessarily not impersonal because it is only possible to carry on transcendental rasa with a person. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are narrated, and the narration is systematically depicted by Srila Sukadeva Goswami. Thus, the subject matter is appealing to all classes of persons, including those who seek liberation and those who seek to become one with the Supreme Whole. In Sanskrit, the parrot is also known as sukha. When a ripened fruit is cut by the red beaks of such birds, its sweet flavor is enhanced. The Vedic fruit, which is mature and ripe in knowledge, is spoken through the lips of Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who is compared to the parrot not for his ability to recite the Bhagavatam exactly as he heard it from his learned father, but for his ability to present the work in a manner that would appeal to all classes of men. The subject matter is so presented through the lips of Srila Sukadeva Goswami that any sincere listener that hears submissively can at once release transcendental tastes which are distinct from the perverted taste of the material world. The ripened fruit is not dropped all of a sudden from a highest point of Krishna Loka. Rather, it has come down carefully through the chain of disciplic succession without change or disturbance. Foolish people who are not in the transcendental disciplic succession commit great blunders by trying to understand the highest transcendental rasa, known as the rasa dance, without following the first footsteps of Sukadeva Goswami, who presents this truth very carefully by stages of transcendental activities. Stages of transcendental realization. One should be intelligent enough to know the position of Srimad Bhagavatam by considering personalities like Sukadeva Goswami, who deals with the subject so carefully. This process of disciplic succession of the Bhagavata Purana suggests Bhagavata school suggests that in the future also Srimad Bhagavatam has to be understood from a person who is factually a representative of Srila Sukadeva Goswami, a professional man who makes a business out of reciting the Bhagavatam illegally is certainly not a representative of Sukadeva Goswami. A professional man who makes business out of reciting Bhagavatam illegally is certainly not a representative of Sukadeva Goswami. Such a man's business is only to earn his livelihood. Therefore, one should refrain from hearing the lectures of such professional men. Such men usually go to the most confidential part of the literature without undergoing the gradual process of understanding this grave subject. They usually plunge into the subject matter of the real of the rasa dance, which is misunderstood by the fullest class of men. Some of them expect this to be immoral, while others try to cover it up by their own stupid interpretations. They have no desire to follow in the footsteps of Srila Sukadeva Goswami. One should conclude, therefore, that the serious student of the rasa should receive the message of Bhagavatam in the chain of disciplic succession from Srila Rupa Sukadeva Goswami, who describes the Bhagavatam from its very beginning and not whimsically to satisfy the mundaner who has very little knowledge in transcendental science. Srimad Bhagavatam is so carefully presented that a dance that a sincere and serious person can at once enjoy the ripened fruit of Vedic knowledge simply by drinking the nectarian juice through the mouth of Sukadeva Goswami and his bona fide representative. So we will stop here. So we have read two verses today, text number 2 and text number 3 of chapter number 1. So in the next session, we will start with the verse number 4 of chapter 1, canto 1. So we'll stop here. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.